are moments in television history that stop you completely. Moments where you forget you are watching a competition, forget the judges, forget the cameras, and simply find yourself witnessing something that feels almost too raw, too real, too powerful to be contained by a stage. The night Courtney Hadwin walked onto the America's Got Talent stage in 2018 was one of those moments. She was 13 years old. She was shaking. She looked like she might turn around and run. And then she opened her mouth, and the entire world shifted. But behind every extraordinary rise, there's a story that the cameras do not always capture. Behind the standing ovations, the viral videos, the magazine headlines, and the record label interest, there was a young girl navigating a world that moved far too fast for someone her age. There was a family trying to protect their daughter while watching her dreams come true in real time. There were injuries, emotional weight, cancelled tours, and quiet nights in a small English town where Courtney Hadwin had to figure out who she would be on the voice that had made her famous. This is not just a story about talent. This is a story about what talent costs, what fame demands, and what happens to a sensitive, extraordinary young person when the world decides it wants a piece of her all at once. To understand Courtney Hadwin, you have to understand where she came from. She was born and raised in Hesleden, a small village nestled in County Durham in the northeast of England. It is a kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the streets are quiet, where ambition and dreams often feel like things that belong to someone else in some other, bigger world. Courtney was not the kind of child who demanded attention. By most accounts from those who knew her growing up, she was actually quite the opposite. She was shy, deeply introverted, and often struggled in social situations that most children navigate without a second thought. School was not always an easy place for her. The ordinary business of making friends, speaking up in class, and moving through hallways full of noise and energy was genuinely difficult for her. Yet inside this quiet, hesitant child lived something enormous. From her earliest years, Courtney was drawn to music with an intensity that went beyond childhood interest. She did not just enjoy listening to songs. She felt them. She absorbed them. She was particularly captivated by the music of an era long before her birth, the raw, unbridled soul and blues of the 1960s and 1970s. Artists like Janis Joplin, Aretha Franklin, and Etta James became her musical education, her emotional vocabulary, and in many ways, her closest companions. There is something both beautiful and quietly heartbreaking about a little girl in a small English village finding her truest self in the music of women who sang about pain, liberation, and a desperate need to be heard. She began taking vocal lessons, guided by a coach named Laura, who recognized almost immediately that what Courtney possessed was not something that could be taught. It could be shaped, refined, and supported, but the fire at the center of her voice was entirely her own. For years, Courtney practiced in the kind of quiet, unglamorous dedication that most people never see. She sang in the local church choir. She performed at small community events. She worked on her craft in spaces that were a world away from any spotlight. And all the while, she remained that shy, sensitive girl who found it genuinely hard to walk into a room full of strangers. The decision to audition for America's Got Talent was not a small one for a family like the Hadwins. It meant traveling across an ocean, navigating an enormous production, and placing their 13-year-old daughter in the middle of one of the most watched talent competitions on American television. The stakes were extraordinarily high, not just professionally, but emotionally. Courtney was not a performer who wore armor. She felt everything. And the idea of standing in front of thousands of people, plus millions more watching at home, while being judged by a panel that included Simon Cowell, was the kind of prospect that would terrify most adults, let alone a shy teenager from a village in Durham. The backstage footage and accounts from that day paint a vivid picture. Courtney stood in the holding area clutching her audition form, her famous fedora hat in her other hand, watching other contestants move and practice around her. She was not networking. She was not chatting confidently with fellow hopefuls. She was doing what she always did when the world felt too big. She was turning inward, breathing, and finding the music somewhere deep inside herself that could carry her through what was coming. When she walked onto that stage, the audience saw what they interpreted as nerves, and they were right. But what they perhaps did not fully appreciate was a particular quality of Courtney's vulnerability. This was not the performative shyness of a contestant playing a character. This was a genuinely introverted child who was about to do the most exposed, most public, most emotionally naked thing a person can do, which is to sing with everything they have in front of the entire world and ask that world to accept what they are offering. The song she chose was Piece of My Heart, originally recorded by Irma Franklin and made iconic by Janis Joplin. The choice itself said everything. This was not a song selected to impress a panel of judges. This was a song that had lived inside Courtney Hadwin for years, a song that spoke to something she understood at an almost cellular level, the desperate, aching desire to give everything and still have the courage to keep going. When the opening chords began and her voice came out soft at first, tentative, the audience leaned in, and then, within moments, something transformed. The shyness did not disappear entirely. What happened was something more complex and more extraordinary. The music moved through her and became the only language she truly spoke without fear. The reaction in that theater was immediate and overwhelming. Simon Cowell, a man who has built an entire career on measured, often withering assessment of performance, leaned forward with an expression of genuine disbelief. Heidi Klum sat upright. Howie Mandel covered his mouth. The audience rose, and before the song had even finished, Simon pressed a golden buzzer, sending a cascade of gold confetti raining down on a 13-year-old girl who had flown across the world from a quiet English village to stand in that moment. Courtney looked up through the falling gold, and her expression was not triumphant. It was overwhelmed. It was a face of someone who had just had something enormous happen to them and had not yet found the words for what it meant. What happened next was a part that the highlight reels rarely dwell on long enough. Within hours, the audition clip was everywhere. Within a day, it had passed 10 million views on YouTube. The headlines came fast and loud. Teen rock star from England, the voice of a new Janis Joplin, the girl who stopped America's Got Talent in its tracks. News outlets across the world ran features. Her hometown of Hesledon found itself suddenly, surreally famous. And at the center of all of it was a 13-year-old girl who had spent her entire life struggling with shyness, who found social situations genuinely difficult, who had poured herself into music precisely because it offered a form of expression that the ordinary world did not. The demands of sudden global fame landing on a person like that are not easy to overstate. Courtney was no longer simply a girl who loved to sing. She was now a product, a headline, a clip that people shared and debated and projected their own feelings onto. Interview requests arrived constantly. Talk show invitations came from across America. The Ellen DeGeneres show reached out. The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon reached out. Record labels began circling. Merchandise companies sent proposals. The machinery of the entertainment industry, enormous, relentless, and entirely indifferent to the emotional and developmental needs of a teenage girl, had decided that Courtney Hadwin was its newest fascination. She handled it with a grace that, in retrospect, should probably have worried the adults around her more than it seemed to at the time. In interviews, she was thoughtful, soft-spoken, and genuinely humble. She spoke about missing her dog back home. She said that singing made her feel free. She laughed with Ellen and joked with Jimmy Fallon and gave every appearance of a young person who was managing well. But Courtney had spent her whole life being quiet, being internal, processing the world through music rather than words. The version of herself that appeared in those television slots was not false, but it was necessarily incomplete. The full picture was more complicated. She was attending classes online, trying to keep up with schoolwork while navigating a schedule that most working adults would have found exhausting. She was traveling constantly, living in unfamiliar places, surrounded by producers and crew members and journalists who were all, in various ways, focused on extracting something from her. She was a child far from home, doing her best to honor the talent she had been given while the world asked more and more of her, and doing it all without the ordinary social tools that most people develop gradually over years of practice, tools that Courtney had always found genuinely hard to build in the first place. The moment that crystallized just how fragile the situation had always been came in October of 2018. Courtney had joined a small tour supporting fellow America's Got Talent finalists. The group was traveling by bus late at night, moving between cities on a schedule that reflected the brutal pace of the entertainment industry rather than the needs of its youngest participant. Heavy rain had been falling for hours along a stretch of Interstate 94. The road was slick, the visibility was poor, and sometime around midnight, as the bus rounded a curve, a gust of wind pushed the vehicle toward the guardrail. The driver braked hard, but the bus skidded sideways, scraping against the barrier with a sound that passengers would not forget quickly before coming to a shuddering stop. Courtney was thrown forward in her seat. Overhead compartments sprang open. Cases and bags shifted and fell. In the sudden silence after the impact, broken only by the hiss of rain against the windows and muffled sounds from other passengers, she reached up and touched her forehead where it had struck a luggage rack. There was blood. Her knee, where it had been jammed against the seat in front, throbbed with a sharp, immediate pain that told her something was seriously wrong. First responders arrived quickly. Paramedics assessed each passenger with the calm efficiency of people trained for exactly this kind of situation. When they examined Courtney, the news was not good. She had sustained a fracture of the right kneecap and a mild concussion. No surgery was required, but the treatment plan that followed was significant. 6 weeks of severely limited movement, physical therapy, strict guidelines around screen time and reading, which meant the phone, the social media, the constant digital connection to the fans who had become such a large part of her world, all of it had to be drastically reduced. She was flown back to England under medical supervision, her parents meeting her at the airport and guiding her carefully through the journey home to Hesleden. The world responded with warmth. Messages of support flooded in from every corner of the globe. Fellow contestants from America's Got Talent recorded video messages. Simon Cowell and Heidi Klum sent personal well wishes. A crowdfunding page organized by a friend raised tens of thousands of dollars in under 2 days to help cover recovery costs. Fans who had purchased tickets for the tour dates that had to be canceled offered to donate their refunds back to Courtney's recovery fund rather than taking the money back. But beneath all of that warmth and all of those messages, there was a quieter truth. A 14-year-old girl, introverted by nature, now navigating injury and enforced stillness after months of overwhelming public exposure, was lying in a hospital room on a different continent from her home, asking doctors not when she could walk properly again, but when she could sing. That single detail, reported in several accounts of her hospital stay, says perhaps more about Courtney Hadwin than any headline ever managed to capture. The voice was not a career choice for her. It was a thing she was. And the fear of losing it, even temporarily, was the deepest fear of all. Recovery happened slowly, as genuine recovery always does. Back in Hesleden, surrounded by her family, her physical therapist, and the quiet rhythms of the village she had grown up in, Courtney began the patient, unglamorous work of healing. She learned to bend her knee a few degrees more each week. She practiced balance exercises that reduced her to short intervals of wobbling effort. She limited her screen time and filled her mornings with songwriting instead, covering notebook pages with lyrics about resilience, about the sound of rain on a window, about the way music could reach inside a person and rearrange something fundamental. Her family converted the garden shed behind their house into a small recording space. A microphone, 2 speakers, a laptop running recording software. In that simple, intimate space, Courtney began to find her voice again. She started with humming, then moved to soft covers of Aretha Franklin and Etta James, careful not to push too hard, listening to her own recordings with a critical ear of someone who understood instinctively what her voice could and could not bear. She uploaded a practice video to her channel, and the response from fans was immediate and deeply moving. People noticed something they described as a new depth in her tone, a quality that had not been there before the crash, before the stillness, before the weeks of sitting quietly with her own thoughts. By late 2018, she returned to the stage for a charity benefit in Newcastle, performing an